Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into what was almost a crazy upset earlier in the Olympic basketball sphere, where France, it took overtime for them to hold off Team Japan, and it took a little bit extra as well in terms of some of the referee situations, but we'll be diving into a little bit of that later. Ultimately, France was able to pull out what became a slugfest down the stretch of that game between them and Team Japan. I believe they only had 2 field goals made during the final 5 minutes of that game, but it was just enough to be able to, I don't know if I would go as far as a comeback. Japan ended up taking a lead with just under 5 minutes left, and that's where the game became a slugfest, and it was very back and forth, but or it wasn't back and forth, I should say. It was just kind of a stalemate for a while, but there was some controversy down the stretch of this game, considering the fact that Rui Hachimura, who was really impactful for Japan, was really leading the way for them. He ended up getting tossed late in this game in the fourth quarter because he picked up a second unsportsmanlike foul. It was while he was playing defense against Rudy Gobert in a post-up situation, and he got Gobert on the arm. The referees were mic'd up through the entirety of the review, which is something that, by the way, feel like the NBA could definitely look to incorporate into their games, where the transparency with the refs is a really great thing that I like that, FIBA does. But ultimately, it was, they said that Rui never made a play for the ball, and that's why it was unsportsmanlike. Unsportsmanlikes are, to some sense at least, supposed to be the equivalent to a technical foul in the NBA. And I understand it wasn't necessarily, a true basketball play that he was trying to block Gobert. He was just trying to stop him from going up. But to have that be how he gets ejected, and keep in mind as well, I am no expert on the FIBA rules, so they probably got it right in terms of what their rules are. I just thought it was very soft, and to have that be the ejection of Rui at that point in the game was a little bit disappointing as well, because it was shaping up to be a great finish, and Rui was sort of having this moment, but he ends up getting ejected down the stretch of this game. Like I mentioned, Japan took the lead with just under 5 minutes left in the game, and neither team was able to score really from that point on. And I think that there was a little bit of concern for me for Team France, because they were trying to, their biggest advantage as a team is having a couple players 7'1" or taller in Rudy Gobert and Victor Wembanyama. And having that size advantage is a very important differential, especially when you look across the world and, there aren't quite as many, true 7-footers. The tallest player on Japan was 6'10", but it didn't matter. That offensive well just wasn't really there for them. And ultimately, again, a lot of turnovers, a lot of missed shots between Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert down the stretch. France ended up being down by 4 points with about 10 seconds left in this game, and they ended up benefiting for what I thought was a ridiculous foul call on a 3-point attempt from Matthew Strazel, and it ended up being a 4-point play that he converted and sent the game to overtime. Now, I've been pretty vocal in the past that I am not a believer that refs can single-handedly cost you a game, so I definitely wouldn't say that is the case in this situation, but it was a little bit of a travesty to see the way that this played out. And obviously, because the Olympics are taking place in France, a lot of the online discussion right coming out of it was that this was, kind of suited for Team France to be able to win at home. I'm not going to go that far. Again, overtime, Japan at that point, granted, they were without their best player. They were very tired, but they went scoreless for the first part. I think France scored the first 8 points in overtime, and the shots just weren't falling for Japan. They did pull it back a little bit closer at the very end there, but ultimately France wins this game 94-90. I do feel like there is a little bit of concern I have, the fact that if this weren't a game that France was able to take advantage of the size differential between them and Japan, that in terms of France is still going to be probably a top 3 team. I would imagine they're going to come away with a medal in this year's Olympics, but when you're talking about, at least their matchup against the United States, the size differential has to be felt. And the defenders are only going to be better for the U.S. with Joel Embiid, Anthony Davis, and Bam Adebayo, So that's something, and I understand that I might even be being a little bit hypocritical here. The U.S. has faced a couple close calls over the course of the exhibition games, and I've been saying that I wouldn't be overreacting to those, but at least in terms of France's ability to win the gold. Like the U.S., they already are the favorites. And when they're playing bad basketball and still being able to beat these other teams, I don't overreact. Because, again, the idea beforehand is that they should be able to win the gold in this. France, they want to be competitive, sure, and they're going to ultimately, I think, have a positive result coming out of these Olympics. But if they want to pull off the unlikely and dethrone the United States, they are going to need to be sharper. France, again, in my opinion, top 3 team in this year's Olympic pool, and it is going to, I would say, rely kind of significantly on the likes of Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert. Now, we also saw part of the reason why France wasn't having the same level of production in the second half, and especially down the stretch of that game, is some of their guards weren't necessarily performing at the level that they were in the first half. Evan Fournier was a very effective player for them early on in this matchup. He sort of fell out of that to some degree. I think it was 11 points in the first half, and then he did end up having a very important step back 3 at one point that was one of their 2 baskets made, I think, in the final 5 minutes of this game. But Evan Fournier isn't necessarily somebody you feel like you're going to be very heavily banking on. Nick Batum was fine. He kind of gives you what Nick Batum can at this point. This is going to have to be them sort of taking advantage of the 2 monstrous big men that they have. And ultimately, I'm just not really sure if it's going to be enough to see them dethrone the United States. Now, they have a ton of talent on this roster. Shout out Celtics legend Gershon Yabusele, who has been a pretty important piece for France over these past couple games. But, you look, there really isn't an elite level of guard play, even sort of forward play that you're going to get. So it's going to be on the shoulders of Gobert and Wembanyama, and I'm just not really sure if I'm going to be able to put my full faith that that will be enough to take down the U.S. But let me know if you think I'm being unfair in the comments section. But we are going to be headed into our final couple segments here as we dive into some NFL subjects, and there is a little bit of uncertainty going on right now with the New England Patriots on the defensive front, as we saw Christian Barmore over the weekend be diagnosed with blood clots that could be putting his season in jeopardy. Additionally, just yesterday at training camp, Matthew Judon had what is being reported as an animated conversation with Gerard Mayo and some members of the front office as he is headed into the final season of his contract and is not happy with how much money he is slated to be making. So we will dive into both of those stories and what it means for the Patriots season outlook. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.